You're listening to the Common Descent Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Common Descent Podcast, where we talk about paleontology, evolution, and all sorts of stuff. This is episode 217, and our topic is bears.
Yeah!
This is a topic that has gotten a lot of enthusiasm from our audience and also from us. This was a super fun episode to plan and then to record.
Bears are they're such satisfying animals. It's exciting to get to talk about them.
They're fascinating. They're really easy and exciting to talk about, both modern and fossil.
Mm-hmm.
So in this episode, we're going to go over bears, where they fall on the mammal family tree. We'll go through their modern diversity. We'll go through their fossil record. We're going to have a whole lot of fun. This episode was much requested. This is one of our uppermost requested episodes. As usual, all of our episodes are requested by our listeners. You can submit your requests through the topic request form on our website. The topic of bears was requested by Jonathan, Matthew, Brett, Dawn, Arturo, Lucas, Kelly, Hadley, Skogsmard, Nick, Ian, Amanda, Milu, CJ, Aaron, Lydia, Jesse, the European Pine Martin, Jesse, a different Jesse, Alice, Jalen, Robert, Teoranosaurus, James, Aaron, Grizzly Adams, very fitting, Johan, Anthony, Athena, Far Too Critical, Justin, Ava, Aporva, Mr. Pockets, Erica, Argentavis, Laura, Diana, McCarty, and a user very aptly named Bear.
Fantastic.
People are very excited, and this is almost certainly going to be a little bit of a supersized episode to fit in all of the exciting things to say about bears. Before we get into the meat, as it were, a few quick announcements. First and foremost, as always, this podcast is supported by our supporters on Patreon. Patrons not only contribute to our educational SciComm efforts, but they also get goodies. We do live streams with our patrons. There's bonus content, bonus news and stuff. At higher levels, patrons can submit questions for the podcast. They get merch and stuff. And at certain levels, when you join, you get a shout out on the podcast. This episode, we would like to welcome Josh, Nick G, and Pacific Austin.
Welcome and thank you for your support.
As always, if you would like to become a patron, find the link down in the episode description. And very exciting times, you can become a patron of Common Descent, but now you can also become a patron, if you so choose, of Leave It to Us. Our spin-off Descendant Plant podcast has officially launched as of the release of this episode. The first 2 episodes of the season are out, where Nora and Allie talk about sex-changing trees and then talk about houseplants and their relationship with house pets. Tons of fun. The Patreon for Leave It to Us is also set up, where you can access bonus content and extra interactions with Nora and Allie. The Leave It to Us section on the Common Descent Discord is active, with people talking about plants and sharing pictures. Leave It to Us is officially live. It is out there. It is happening. Season 1 of Leave It to Us will be releasing all throughout the summer. Find Leave It to Us wherever you get your podcast. It is a separate feed. It is another podcast, so you can subscribe to it separately. You can also become a patron separately if you so choose. You can follow Leave It to Us on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can join the Discord. It's very exciting. Nora and Allie are doing an excellent job so far.
It's so cool, finally being able to give all of our Allie episode lovers the podcast they deserve.
Yes, this idea was a joke that we made 11 months ago, and here it is. Here's the podcast. Also, if you missed it, we just finished Silver Screen Science for this year. We did 3 different Planet of the Apes movies. That is on The Common Descent feed, so go check that out. Plus, the live stream that we did is archived on our YouTube channel.
It was a lot of fun. Check it out.
Lots of good stuff. It's May now, which means Croc and Snake Month is coming up. There's a lot going on to be excited about. One more thing, this episode, I just want to give a special shout out to the general realm of public broadcasting and public media. Here in the US, our government is newly trying to add restrictions to things like PBS and NPR, and even stuff like Wikipedia, which are major sources of education and information for people all over the country and beyond. Obviously, public information and freely available info and education is very important to us. So, this is a shout out to those organizations. As a reminder, most of those things take public donations and public support. So, if you are so inclined and capable, throw a donation at PBS or NPR or Wikipedia or whatever you feel most connected to.
Yeah, no, good causes to give a little bit of support to right now.
And with the announcements wrapped up, let us move on to the news. Every episode, before we get into our main topic of discussion, we collect some news that's going on out there in paleontology and evolution and science, the kind of stuff that we get excited about. Will, why don't you start with some news?
Happily, my first news is about alligators, or so we thought, because this is a study that seems to have found that Deinosuchus isn't among the alligatoroids.
Oh, it's a faker.
Yes. This is research by Jules Walter et al. In Communications Biology, and the article is by Jake Bueller in science.org. So Deinosuchus, one of the most famous fossil animals, the giant, terrible crocodile, is one of the largest crocodilians that's ever lived. Estimates pushing upwards of 40 feet long, though we will address that in this study as well.
We talked about Deinosuchus a bunch in episode 194.
Yes.
Although now it sounds like maybe we shouldn't have.
Yeah, I was thinking that the entire time taking these notes. Famously, Deinosuchus has been grouped with the alligatoroids. So not an alligator, but on the alligator side of the modern crocodilian tree. But this study seems to indicate that it shouldn't be grouped there, which is not entirely surprising because some aspects of Deinosuchus have not fully gelled with being among the alligatoroids. The big part is that Deinosuchus fossils are mostly, and I think for some species, exclusively found in marine sediment. And we mentioned this in the episode that it's been often suggested that due to where it's found and the fact that it's found on both sides of the intercontinental seaway that was in the US, that it is very likely Deinosuchus had some amount of salt tolerance or salt glands of some sort, which would be unusual for an alligatoroid, which is a group that for every modern species and all the fossil species we know of other than Deinosuchus don't have salt glands, are salt intolerant, and are freshwater species. It's also unusual because alligatoroids are, for the most part, a fairly small-membered group. There's not a lot of other giant members. It's not alone. Pterosaurus is a caiman that is also equally giant. But all in all, these are stand-out members from this group. It's not common that we find large alligatoroids. This study wanted to get a better idea of where Deinosuchus fit into everything, so they looked at 219 physical features across skull shape and other bones of the body from 128 living and extinct crocodilians to get a really nice idea of how everyone should shake out, who should be related to who, and to do some updated size analyses and estimates for different members across the tree. This does not group Deinosuchus with the alligatoroids, and in fact puts Deinosuchus as a stem crocodilian, far, far away from the alligatoroids toward the base of the modern crocodilian tree.
Yeah, so that means it's not an alligator. It's also not a crocodile. It's not on the croc line. It is toward the base of the entire tree.
Yes. So something much more distantly related. And this also is true for a couple of other alligatoroids. Letiosuchus and Diplocynodon were two other alligatoroids that also got grouped as stem members.
This is, if I remember correctly, this is similar to Sarcosuchus, isn't it? That it's not actually a crocodile. It's not an alligator. It's kind of an earlier branch of the overall
Yes.
crocodilian group.
And I believe Sarcosuchus is even outside of the modern crocodilian lineage. Like, they are pre-modern crocodilians. While Deinosuchus does seem like it is within that crocodilian basket, but is toward the bottom of the branches. This suggests also that the salt tolerance might have been something that Deinosuchus had ancestrally and did not develop uniquely among its alligator cousins, but probably had alongside the stem ancestor, the original ancestor to all modern crocodilians. This study interprets that most likely they were salt tolerant, and this was an ancestral condition that was lost in alligators and their cousins, that the alligatoroid lineage lost salt tolerance, and that's why both alligators and caimans today do not have salt glands. They also suggested that this might potentially be a part of the explanation for why alligators and caimans tend to be a smaller group, that if they can't be marine, you are stuck in the smaller habitats of fresh water. So that actually might have leaned them toward being more commonly small-bodied species. There are a lot of, especially like today when we think of alligators, we think of the American alligator, which is big, but the Chinese alligator is small, and a bunch of fossil alligators were very small, and most caimans today are fairly small. So even though there are big members, it's usually a fairly small-bodied group, and this could be part of the reason why. And speaking of size, this study also was able to get some estimations and found some interesting trends in body size across crocodilians. One, that this dwarfism we see in alligatoroids seems to have evolved early in their lineage. So that seems to have been something that their ancestor may have been a small member and gave rise to many small members, or early members at least were. It also re-estimated the body size for Deinosuchus, which, as we said, previous estimates ranged between like 8 to 12 meters, so upwards of 40 feet potentially. This study interprets Deinosuchus as probably topping out at 7.7 meters, so probably max size being the lower estimates or nearer the lower estimates of previous studies.
Sure. So more like 25 to 30 feet rather than 35 to 40 feet.
Exactly, which still a big croc, but they do
Still
point
big.
out means it almost overlaps with the largest individual crocodiles today.
Yes.
So not actually as far outside the realm of what we're used to today as we typically thought Deinosuchus was, if this is indeed an accurate estimate. Which they point out is another trend they see, that gigantism in crocodile forms has been a regular occurrence and not nearly as seemingly rare. Like, we have some of the famous ones, Sarcosuchus, Deinosuchus, pterosaurs, but that there have been over 20-foot members basically on the regular since the Cretaceous. At any given time, there were members that reached those sizes, and it seems like that's actually not a rarity. That's a normal thing for crocodiles, crocodilian and crocodiliforms to do when the opportunity arises, when the environment is allowing for a really big croc-shaped thing to show up, a really big croc evolves. And as they put it, when a marine or wetland habitat can handle it, you will get a big croc. The article also does quote Adam Cozette, who is another paleontologist not associated with the study, who does weigh in to say that the placement of Deinosuchus is a more extreme than they were expecting, not ridiculous, like it's not bad findings, but they are a bit more hesitant, because one of the points that the researchers make is that Deinosuchus is found on both halves of the Western Interior Seaway, but the ones found on either side are distinct species. And so the suggestion that because it's on both sides means it was likely saltwater tolerant because it was traveling across, they make the point that it could have been a single passage, and then they speciated into two different species and then didn't cross it. So it doesn't refute their findings, but that doesn't also guarantee that it had to be a marine crocodilian to be able to be on both sides. So there's definitely some hesitation. This is not a for sure, but this is a very extreme repositioning of Deinosuchus. So some people are hesitant to just accept it right away.
Very interesting. Would have been very courteous of these authors to publish this a year ago,
Seriously.
so that we could have then incorporated it into the alligators and caimans episode.
And then realize, so once again, whoever's out there editing the true episodes, slide this in.
Yep, slip this news piece. This one goes right in there to that gators and caimans discussion. Well, knowing that you would come in today with croc news, I have brought some snake news. This is research about not fossils, but evolutionary patterns that we see among modern snake species. This is research in the journal Evolution by Samuel Hurst et al., and in the blog post we will link to an article in The Guardian by Richard Luscombe. One of the things that modern biologists and especially conservationists are really interested in learning about is what happens to biodiversity when habitats get broken apart. Because human impacts are causing all sorts of changes to the environment, and one of the most common side effects of that is what's called habitat fragmentation. Chunks of forest or grassland or whatever that used to be connected are being disconnected, and now there's grassland in between the chunks of forest, and animals' ranges are being disrupted, or a highway goes through the range, or something limits the ability of a species to move around. Figuring out exactly what happens when this occurs is difficult to study because often it's occurring right now, and that's hard to follow. However, some researchers have pointed out that studying what happens to animals when they become isolated in different habitats is something we can do via the proxy of islands.
Yay!
We've talked about this a whole bunch of times. On islands, animals tend to evolve in they're evolving in isolation, and there are many cases where species get dispersed across a number of islands and end up on their own unique evolutionary trajectory. This study wanted to look at island evolutionary patterns among rattlesnakes across islands in the Gulf of California. Specifically, they were examining rattlesnake venom and how the venom was different from species to species and island to island. So it sounds like they went to the islands, captured 83 rattlesnakes, sampled venom from each of them. These were of 4 different species: speckled, red diamond, Baja, and southwestern speckled rattlesnakes, captured on 11 different islands in the Gulf of California. So this is northwestern Mexico, islands where there's been tons of dispersal of snakes. Venom in snakes has been studied a whole bunch because, of course, it has. It's very relevant to us medically. Variations in venom from snake population to population are known to correlate with diet, which makes sense. That is the primary thing that the venom is there for. And previous studies have found that when a species gets split across different islands, the venom composition tends to be different between different island populations. Here, they were primarily looking at venom complexity. So how many ingredients are in the venom? We talked about this back in episode 97. Snake venom tends to be just a whole cocktail of different toxins and different substances. Venom isn't one thing, it's a whole mess of things. And how many things there are and what proportions those different ingredients are varies from snake to snake. Here they were looking at how complex, how abundant and diverse are the components within each snake's venom. They predicted that what they should see is that on islands with greater biodiversity, they expected to see more complex venoms. And the logic here is that larger island or a more biodiverse island has more available prey, so the snakes that are eating things would be expected to have more complex venoms that could handle a variety of different prey animals.
Makes sense.
They did not find this. They found a number of different correlates with venom variation. For one, more isolated islands, which means islands farther away from the mainland. Snakes on more isolated islands tended to have simpler venoms. This matches the expectations of the study because farther away islands tend to have lower biodiversity because fewer things can get out there, which means less available prey, which means there's less need for complexity in the venom. You can get by with simple venom that can handle the limited amount of prey available to you on the island. On larger islands, and islands closer to the mainland, which are more biodiverse, they found that the snakes there also had simpler venoms.
Okay.
Which was not expected. It was expected that it would be the opposite situation, that they would have more complex venom for handling a variety of prey. What they think is probably happening here is instead of expanding the venom complexity to handle lots of prey, the snakes are specializing on certain prey because there is so much available. You can survive as a specialist.
Makes sense.
This is also supported by another thing they noticed, which is that on islands with more coexisting snake species, the venoms were simpler.
Gotcha.
Which also suggests they might be specializing in their venom to avoid competing with other snakes. That each species or each population is specializing on a particular group of prey. This is interesting because, number one, finding that a hypothesis is incorrect is always extremely fun in science. And it reveals, they make the point, and I think it was the press release for this, that these results aren't just about snake venoms. These results are about how animals evolve in isolated habitats when they're separated from other populations, when they're in a restricted geographical range, which has implications for all habitat. Any habitat that could end up being diminished or fragmented, which is happening quite a lot, again, because of what we're doing to the environment. So this is revealing some of the interesting dynamics that are happening between species and populations on limited island populations.
Very cool. Well, and it's always a surprise when you see animals in two very different situations, but doing the same thing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
When it would make sense for it to be different. Here it's interesting because it seems like they are doing the same thing, but potentially for slightly different reasons.
Yeah.
That one, you have no reason to have complex venom because there is not a wide variety of prey. And the other one, you have the ability to specialize, so you specialized.
Which does make some sense that I would imagine evolution will favor simplicity whenever possible.
Yeah.
If you can survive on simplicity, then that's the direction you'd expect to be able to go.
It's fewer things to go wrong, fewer things to have to, build and code for. So just makes sense that would happen whenever the opportunity arises. That's a really good point.
Yeah. The article, the authors make the note that what they want to do for the next steps is to do the same study, but instead of venom samples, taking blood samples and seeing if similar patterns can be observed in DNA. Are other aspects of the snake's anatomy and lifestyle also following these patterns?
Cool.
Pretty cool stuff.
That's really neat. That's something I had never actually thought of much, is what was happening to the venom of island snakes. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, since I knew that you were going to bring a snake news, I brought another crocodile news.
Curses.
My next news is about what seems to be an island sebekid crocodile, which means an island terrestrial predatory croc. Which is not what they expected to find on islands where typically terrestrial predators are absent. This is research by Lazaro Vignola Lopez et al. In the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, Biological Sciences, and the article we'll link to is a press release from Florida Museum of Natural History in Science Daily. So, still talking about islands, famously, island habitats are often lacking the land-based predators that you find on the mainland, which then leads to prey being less defensive and not having to have the same behaviors to deal with those predators, and other predators stepping in to take on that more dominant predatory role. Things like birds, snakes, and your typical crocodilians. This is a pretty well-studied pattern and is well known from the islands they're studying here, which is the West Indies, so in the Caribbean and islands around there. But some fossils that have been found have not fit this picture of the the island ecosystem we expect. About 30 years ago, the first of some serrated teeth were found on some of these islands that dated back to about 18 million years ago in Cuba, that were sharp, flattened side to side, and serrated along the edge, which is the tooth of a terrestrial predator. Like, that tooth is, when we find it on land and not in a shark mouth, that is what we tend to see in large land-based predators, which we didn't think were on these islands. They also found similar teeth in Puerto Rico that dated to about 29 million years old, but they weren't able to identify who the tooth belonged to until this most recent discovery that the paper is focusing on, which is another tooth from the Dominican Republic that was also with 2 vertebrae.
Ooh.
And that allowed them to ID it as a Sebekid crocodilian. These are famous for being the most recent terrestrial crocodilians that were on our planet. There were many examples of crocodilians coming onto land and becoming terrestrial predators, herbivores, and some omnivorous ones, that seem to have been omnivorous. The Sebekids were famous in South America, where they basically took over after the dinosaurs as one of the top land predators, and lasted until about 11 million years ago. The fact that we have a terrestrial croc on these islands, and if these other teeth are also Sebekid crocs on multiple islands, suggests, one, that the ecosystems on these islands in the past were much more like the ecosystems of South America than they are today, where they are a very distinct dynamic compared to South America in modern times. And it's likely that when these terrestrial crocs died out, that then it allowed the setup of what we consider the more typical island situation. It also suggests that the dispersal events that happened with some of these islands might have been different than typically thought, which beforehand it was thought it was over ocean passages that happened for animals to get there. These very terrestrial and larger bodied, some Sebekids could get up to be almost 20 feet long. So some of these were large animals. They didn't give a size estimate for what this species likely was, but it doesn't sound like it was a tiny, tiny one. They say that this could be potential evidence for a different hypothesis called the Garlandia hypothesis, which suggests periods of time where there were land bridges or shallower and more frequent islands that might have allowed easier island hopping for animals to get to these islands and then become isolated, since this would have been an animal that might have struggled to make a long distance swim. And then finally, this fossil is 5 million years younger, roughly, than the last Sebekid crocs we thought existed.
Huh.
So it looks like these islands might have acted as a refugia, as a refuge for the last remaining populations of Sebekid crocodiles.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's super cool. I'm hopeful that more excavations will find more fossils. And also, I don't know I don't know this area very well, so I don't know how well established the dating is. Whenever there's something that significantly extends the time range of a group of animals, there's the question of, all right, is the dating correct? Did the dating get mixed up somewhere here?
Yes.
So there could be a bunch of these all over these islands up until the Pliocene, which is very cool.
Yeah, the article does mention the fact that being island deposits, that can sometimes make the preservation of fossils trickier, and that these were found in a road cut. So it may be that just the type of digging to find these just hasn't been happening as much, and so they could be hopefully preserved on at least the 3 places that they've been found so far.
Very cool stuff. Well, I don't have any more snake news to talk about, but I do have pterosaur news, and specifically pterosaur footprints.
Ooh, I love these.
It's very cool. This is research by Robert Smith et al. In Current Biology, and we'll link to an article in Interesting Engineering by Mrugakshi Dixit. Pterosaurs are the flying reptiles of the Mesozoic era. There has been lots of research on pterosaur fossils, on the bones and skulls and teeth of pterosaurs, but not as much research done on trackways, footprints. Now, you might think that there's not as much research done on trackways because we just don't have a lot of pterosaur trackways, and that is apparently not true. There are extensive pterosaur trackways known, but a limiting factor of studying them has been the difficulty of identifying which group of pterosaurs each footprint belongs to. So there's a lot of places where researchers have been able to say, these are footprints from pterosaurs, but without knowing any more specifics than that, there's very limited amount of what we can say about their behavior and their ecology and evolution and so on. This study sought to resolve this problem by trying to link certain shapes of footprints to certain shapes of pterosaur feet. They conducted 3D analysis. They used 3D imaging tools, and then they did statistical morphometric analyses to compare the shape of trackways and foot bones of pterosaurs from all over the world.
Cool.
To try to see, can we reliably match up some of these feet with some of these tracks? And they were able to do so. They identified 3 different track morphotypes, so shapes of footprints that align with 3 different foot morphotypes that belong to 3 different major groups of pterosaurs.
Yay!
The 3 groups are as follows. First, the tenacasmids and their relatives, which are pterosaurs that have long skulls and needle-like teeth, which have been interpreted as aquatic, like feeding like a heron, dipping the bill or the snout into the water and grabbing or sifting out food. The Zungaripterids, which are interpreted as shellfish eaters because they have crushing adapted teeth and bills. The tip of the mouth tends to be toothless, and the teeth are large and well adapted for crushing. And the third group are Ajdarchians, which is a famous group of pterosaurs that includes a lot of some of the biggest ones, like Quetzalcoatlus is in this group. Ajdarchians have been interpreted as being more terrestrial, stalking. We talked about this a while ago in the news, that the hypothesis that these were terrestrial stalking predators, more like Seriemas or birds that walk around on the ground grabbing at food.
My thought always goes to marabou storks.
And marabou storks is a great example. The authors appear to have been able to say this shape of footprint goes to these 3 different groups. 3 different footprints, types, 3 different groups of pterosaurs. They note that these are 3 of the groups of pterosaurs that have previously been inferred as the most terrestrial, based on the shape of their legs and their feet. They've been inferred to spend more time on the ground, so finding their trackways as identifiable does make some sense. They also note that the trackways generally are found in the same places and time periods as the body fossils of each of these groups.
Cool.
From the distribution of these tracks, they were able to make some ecological and evolutionary interpretations. The tenacasmid tracks were found to be very common in coastal habitats, more common than the body fossil record indicated they were. So they point out that this might mean that these pterosaurs were an even more important part of coastal ecosystems than we realized. For the Zungaripterids, the same region of the world that has beds dominated with Zungaripterid skeletal remains also has deposits dominated with Zungaripterid footprints. It sounds like it kind of alternates. Like some beds have lots of bones and some beds have lots of footprints.
Neat.
And the Azhdarchid footprints they found were almost entirely found in inland deposits,
That's
not
what I
in
was
marine
thinking.
deposits, which suggests that these pterosaurs were not foraging on the water like the other ones, but were in fact spending most of their time walking around inland away from major ocean waters.
So cool.
They also note that there are a bunch of groups of pterosaurs that they did not find footprints that they could assign to those pterosaurs. The most significant ones were there are no known tracks of pterosaurs before the mid Jurassic,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they were able to find no tracks that match the morphology of the feet of early pterosaurs,
Yeah.
the non-pterodactyloid pterosaurs. Morphologically, based on the structure of the skeleton, researchers have inferred that those pterosaurs were mostly climbers. They were mostly in the
Hmm.
trees, climbing up and down. The fact that there are no footprints assignable to them seems to also support that pterosaurs didn't actually go onto land until around the mid Jurassic.
Which, yeah, totally makes sense that that would have this effect on the footprint fossil record.
And then there's a bunch of other groups like the Tapeharids and the Ornithochirids, which the authors also did not find footprints that they could assign to those groups. They point out that those are pterosaurs that have been noted to have shorter digits or more reduced hind limbs and have been interpreted as not very good walkers.
Yep, yep,
So
yep.
they might not have found footprints of them because they just weren't very good at walking. The other group they didn't find any footprints of are pteranodontians, the group
Okay,
that
I was
includes
wondering.
pteranodon, which they point out is interesting because they are interpreted as being good walkers. But they also point out that pteranodontian fossils, body fossils, are found almost exclusively in ocean sediments.
That's what I thought.
So they might be spending very little time on land. There's a discussion somewhere in the paper about their foot morphology might not be exclusively adapted for walking, but maybe more for taking off and landing on the ocean. They might have
Yep,
been
yep, yep.
moving around like seagulls do.
Yeah. Well, and it also makes me wonder because, like, you know, comparing them to birds, which is the easiest thing to compare pterosaurs to, there's tons of birds like albatross that spend so much of their life on the ocean. They do come back to land to nest and, when land's available, but it's very often like rocky cliffs
Yeah.
where you're not going to leave a footprint. That's especially not one that's going to get the chance to fossilize. Like, no sediments being deposited on the top of a rocky cliff.
Right.
So you could have pterosaurs where it's like, yeah, they do spend quite a bit of time on the ground, but it's on mountainsides and places where you're not going to find their footprints. So they were great walkers. They just weren't walking in mud. They were walking way up on rocks.
They weren't foraging on the land, right? They weren't wandering around in the sediment or in the shallow water. They were walking where their nests were, perhaps, but they were foraging, perhaps, out at sea.
Yeah, or on the wing.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
Now, they do point out in the paper that there are a bunch of, they identified these 3 morphotypes of tracks, but they also note there were other track types that they were not able to assign to any particular group of pterosaurs. So it's very likely that other groups did leave some tracks, and some of those unknown tracks might belong to other groups of pterosaurs. So there's still plenty to be explored here. But at least for now, it sounds like we have diagnostic features for assigning 3 different types of footprints to 3 different types of pterosaurs.
That's so cool. It's fun to think. It's like those field guides you get when you go to a national park of like, here's the footprints you might see while hiking. Here's the animals that means we're nearby at some point. We're starting to put that together for pterosaurs. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I have one extra bit of news, and now I feel bad because you didn't have a second snake news to make this third bit of croc news warranted. But they did name some new species of modern crocodile, so I have to talk about it.
Okay.
This is research by Jose Avila Cervantes et al. In Molecular Phylogenetics and Evolution, and the article is by Patrick Pester in Live Science. This research was a genetic survey of crocodile species in the neotropics, specifically looking at 3 crocodile species: the American crocodile, the Cuban crocodile, and Morelet's crocodile. They looked at specific populations of these groups, wanting to get an idea for how diverse they really were, since they cover a wide variety of habitats, both coastal, inland, and island habitats. And these crocs are also have some fairly unique behaviors and morphology from one another. So they took genetic samples from 3 populations of American crocodile, a coastal population of Morelet's crocodile, and the only population of Cuban crocodiles, because they are quite endangered. And they did some measurements of the skull so that they could compare those as well. And they found that for the skull, they span a gradient of morphological features. So between these species, you get a really smooth gradient of crocodile skull shapes and across their ranges. But the genetics became exciting because they found major genetic differences, as expected, between the Cuban and Morelet's crocodiles from the American crocodiles, but they also found 5 clusters in the American crocodiles, 2 of which are specific populations on 2 islands that also show some physical differences in the skull. This is the populations on an island of Cozumel and the atoll of Banco Chinchorro off of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. And these seem to be distinct enough, and the physical differences in their skull are enough to suggest that these are distinct species from the American crocodile. Both are very small populations, around 500 individuals. And the differences aren't crazy, but they did note that the ones on Banco Chinchorro have broader and longer snouts than the other island group. And so it does seem like they could be unique species, which, always exciting to have more crocodile species. We're slowly catching up. But also suggests that there has been rapid evolution in this area of the world among these crocodiles, for that we maybe have seeing very recent speciation among this population of crocodiles.
That's pretty cool.
It's pretty neat.
It'll be interesting to see more of that. Well, to balance the scales, I Googled snake news, and there's a headline that says, Universal antivenom may grow out of man who lets snakes bite him 200 times.
Oh, I think I did hear something about that.
Yeah, I saw a headline about that. I don't know what that's about, but there's some more snake stuff.
Ouch.
Well, that's the news, which means it's time to move on to our main featured discussion, which today is about bears. So we're going to come back. We're going to talk about what bears are, what makes them special. We're going to meet every bear that there is, and then we're going to go into the fossil record and meet a lot of the bears that there was. So stay tuned for that. All right, strap in. We're talking about bears today, and there's a lot to discuss. They're such cool animals.
They really are.
They're very iconic. They're very familiar. They're also in most parts of the world.
Yeah.
They're not on every continent, but they are a nearly worldwide group of animals and are very familiar to most cultures in the world, in most places, rather, developed alongside bears.
Yeah, most places have a bear.
Lots of places have bears. So let's first situate ourselves on the mammal family tree. Bears are carnivorans. They are in the group Carnivora, where they are alongside dogs and cats and hyenas and weasels and raccoons, the carnivorous mammals for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Within that group, bears are the family Ursidae. They are typically considered most closely related to musteloids. So weasels, wolverines, ferrets, also their close cousins like raccoons and skunks, and pinnipeds, seals and sea lions and walruses. All three of those together are sometimes considered Arctoidea, a broader group. Bears are pretty easy to talk about in terms of general features because bears are very samey.
They really are.
There's not a lot of anatomical variety in bears. Bears tend to have fairly large bodies. They have stocky legs, right? They're not long-limbed. They have shorter, robuster legs. They have short tails. And, as we have mentioned many times on the podcast, they have plantigrade feet.
Yes.
Which means their heel touches the ground. This is how our feet work. As opposed to digitigrade animals like dogs and cats, which are walking on their toes, but the heel is lifted up off the ground. We've mentioned bears having plantigrade stance before because it's always the first example that I mention when bears, raccoons, and humans are like my 3 plantigrade animal examples.
Absolutely.
Bears also have large claws, which they use for a variety of behaviors. Typical size for bears tends to be in the 100 to 200 kilogram range. So 200 to 400 pounds. Bears are big.
They're big animals.
Just like an average sized bear is larger than many humans.
Yep.
Bears are big animals. The biggest bears can be more than half a ton and can be quite big. Bears include the largest carnivores on land today.
Yeah.
We will talk about those bears a bit later. At the front of a bear, their faces, they have long snouts, they have small rounded ears, they have a variety of tooth shapes, kind of like dogs or raccoons if you ever look in their mouth. They've got stabbing and slicey teeth up front, and they've got grinding and crushing teeth in the back. Bears have an excellent sense of smell. Bears came up in episode 130 where we talked about smell because they are astoundingly good at it.
They're usually, if you look up like the records, the ones that are listed as having the most sensitive sense of smell.
Yes. Bears are also excellent climbers. They are excellent swimmers. And they move pretty fast on land.
They are surprisingly, like, for such stocky little animals, surprisingly quick.
Yes, they're not built for running the way that, like, dogs and cats are, but they can move quite well. I often think of bears as being all-terrain carnivorans. They kind of are. A bear can kind of make do wherever it is.
Wherever the food is, they can get there.
Yes, absolutely. This is why campers have to be careful.
Yep.
Well, yeah, they'll get to your food.
Well, that's why we have to create escape rooms to put the food to try to keep it away from the bear.
Yes. Bears are extremely widespread. They are found all over North America and Eurasia, and there is one species in South America. Bears mostly live in forests. That is kind of the classic bear habitat. There are other habitats they live in. There are bears that are found out on like the tundra or in more grassland or shrubland type areas, but for the most part, forests.
Yes.
And indeed, if you are in a forest in the northern hemisphere, odds are there's bears.
Yes.
They are almost ubiquitous in northern hemisphere forests.
Someone's listening to this on a hike right now.
Watch out, there's bears.
And as you turned around, all the bears ducked down into the brush.
To all of our friends in Australia, lucky you. Bears are also, one of the things that really characterizes bears is that they are omnivores. They are excellent. They are some of the best animals at being omnivores.
Yeah, they're the other animal, when talking about omnivores, other than us, that usually comes up.
Yes. They eat vegetation, like actual like leafy foods. They'll eat fruits and nuts and insects. Many of them will eat carrion, and many of them will actively hunt for prey of various sizes. Exactly the proportions of meats to plants in a bear's diet varies a ton. It can vary by species, it can vary by location, it can vary by season. extremely variable. Bears are really good at, like not only can they move in any habitat, they can also eat something in every habitat.
They really are the when in Rome animal.
They kind of do whatever they need to do.
Yeah.
This actually brings us to something that is very unusual about bears that I hadn't ever considered in these words until I put the notes together for this. Bears are unusual for being large omnivores.
That's a good point.
Most omnivores are not big.
Yeah.
Particularly when we look at carnivorans, cats and dogs and stuff, the biggest ones tend to be specialized carnivores. And in other groups of mammals, the biggest ones tend to be specialized herbivores.
Yeah.
You don't really get gigantic omnivores very often.
Yeah, I'd never made that connection, but
yeah,
most of your other famous omnivores are smaller animals typically.
Exactly. And likely this is partly due to the fact that carnivorous animals tend to be not good at eating plants.
Yes.
So like a wolf or a cat, they don't get a lot of nutrition from plants because their jaws aren't good for chewing plants. Their digestive system isn't good for digesting plants. So if you're gonna be an animal like that eating plants, you end up having to be small because you just can't get that much nutrition out of it.
Yes.
Bears are an exception. Part of this is because they are very efficient chewers. Their jaws and teeth are adapted for different style of grinding than other carnivores. I believe I read that their teeth chew front to back. Like they grind front to back as opposed to how a cow does it.
Cool.
So they're just better at processing plants than other carnivorous mammals are.
Neat.
Another feature that I've seen pointed out as maybe helping bears to achieve this lifestyle is that they hibernate.
Yeah.
The bears are not the only animals that hibernate. There are plenty of mammals that hibernate. There are like mustelids that hibernate and such. But bears are particularly good at it, and they are commonly associated with it.
And also, with what you just compared, they're also a fairly big hibernator.
And they're big hibernators.
Now that I'm thinking about it. Most other ones that come up are small animals a lot of the time.
Yes. Huh. Yeah, bears are they're like a medium-sized animal in the body of a big animal.
Yeah.
They're like when you meet a little dog that has the attitude of a big dog. Yeah, bears are kind of like that.
Well, it makes, because when you said they were close to mustelids, I was like, oh, so the comparison of a wolverine to being a tiny bear, not that far off.
Not that far off.
Maybe these are just big wolverines.
They're just big wolverines, which, frankly, terrifying. Now, we did a whole episode about hibernation, episode 199, but let's look specifically at bears just for a moment. Most bears do some form of either hibernation or, if not true proper hibernation, denning. That they will hunker down in an area and wait out whatever they're waiting out. This varies quite a bit, even within species. So here in North America, our black bears. Down south where we are, black bears either don't hibernate at all or they might hibernate for a short period of time. Northern populations of black bears can hibernate for as much as 7 months of the year, which means that they can spend more of the year in hibernation than not in hibernation.
This is the pitch that the den salesman
Yes.
give. You're going to spend 70% of your life in this den. Don't you want it to be high quality?
On the other hand, there are some entire species of bears, like sun bears, for example, that aren't known to hibernate at all. So there's a lot of variation. Some bears hibernate or den when it's just a difficult time to be awake. So during the winter or during a harsh season, this hibernation tends to involve fasting, so not eating for a while, reduced activity, right? They just go to sleep, basically, and their metabolism slows down. I have seen some papers argue that bears are not true hibernators because their body temperature doesn't lower very much.
Right.
But they are powering down their bodies. In some species, females will den specifically when preparing to give birth and then when raising the newborns. And in those cases, they fast and they don't move very much, but their metabolism stays the same.
Right.
So they have a couple different versions of hibernation that they can do.
And I know there's some that will give birth during hibernation.
Some combine it.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so they will go into the den and then come out with babies.
Yes. Months later.
Yes.
Denning often takes place inside caves, very famously. It can also be in trees, in cavities in a tree, or burrows.
Yeah.
Some bears will actually dig a burrow for themselves. They've got those big claws. There are also suspected denners among fossil bears.
Ooh.
There are some species that are commonly found in caves, and there are at least a few instances of fossils of a female bear with juveniles in a cave, where they were likely denning or hibernating there.
Cool.
Hibernation has been pointed out as probably one of the things that allows bears to be as versatile as they are. That if you have the ability to just conk out for several months, then it doesn't matter if you don't have enough food there or if the environment's not ideal. So between their efficient chewing, their bodies that allow them to basically whatever they want, and their ability when they need to just power down for a bit, bears can kind of live anywhere and eat anything.
Which, once again, usually these are traits we talk about with, like, rodents.
Yeah, there are tons of rodents that all of that is true about.
And so the fact that these are some of the largest land animals is really an interesting combination.
Yeah, bears are kind of the uber generalists.
Yeah.
They are the best at being good at everything.
Yeah.
They're the best jack of all trades. It's incredible.
They're the best at not being best.
Yes,
but
they're the
being
most
good enough.
The most specialized, unspecialized animals. This is kind of their claim to fame. This is a really fun thing.
So cool.
Now, among modern bears, it's such a lovely, manageable group. There are 8 living species of bears. There are lots of subspecies that have been proposed and dismantled over time, but there are 8 species that are agreed upon by scientists. These are the American black bears, Asiatic black bears, brown bears, polar bears, sun bears, sloth bears, spectacled bears, and giant pandas.
Yes.
Now, if there's a bear you think that I missed there, odds are it is either a subgroup of one of those bears or one of the many animals that are called bears that are not bears.
Yes.
Raccoons are often called, I think it's their German name, is wash bear. Not a bear, though they are kind of close.
I didn't know that name.
Yeah,
That's
wash
great.
bear is, I forget, I'm not going to try to do it, but that's what the name for raccoon is. Also in a ton of other languages. Raccoons are called bear in a bunch of languages.
I mean, it makes sense. They are very berry.
Red pandas, not bears. They are in their own family. We talked about Australia before, which does not have bears. They have koalas, which are marsupials.
Yes.
And not bears, because as we all know, they do not have the koalifications.
And are actually very specialized.
And extremely specialized.
They're not doing the bear thing right.
Among the living species of bears, their relationships to each other are historically extremely confusing.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of study and difficulty trying to figure out which bears are related to which other bears. There was a study in 2017 that it was a big genetic study that found evidence of gene flow between different groups of bears is extremely ancient.
Yeah.
Which suggests that species have just been swapping genetics, not even the most closely related species. So the bear family tree is this mosaic of genes going all over the place. Hybridization is still common today.
Yeah.
Grizzly bears and polar bears are known to hybridize in the wild. So are sun bears and Asian black bears, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then there's others that have hybridized in captivity. So it's very difficult to sort out this bear is most closely related to this bear because it also has genes from that bear over there. Because they've just been kind of swapping for thousands and millions of years.
Which is an interesting scenario because typically when you say there's only 8 species, you'd expect that, well, then the systematic, the taxonomy has got to be pretty easy to sort out because you've only got 8. You can spend as much time on each one as you want. But that's not always the case. Some animals, especially in the case like this where they can keep interbreeding but are still very distinct in many ways, really muddies the water and makes it hard to tell where the history goes.
Yes. One thing that seems to be agreed upon, The consensus is that modern bears fit into 3 subfamilies: the Ailuropodines, the Tremarctines, and the Ursines. Ursines is most of them.
Yep.
And that 2017 study found that the Ursine bears are split into one group that is the Asian species, closely related to each other, and the other group, which is the American and then more northern species. That's how I've broken it down for the overview of bears that we're about to do. At the very least, it's geographically consistent.
Yes.
So if that phylogeny gets overturned, it still makes some sort of sense.
Yes.
So let's take a tour of all the bears. This is one of those lovely where we can go over the diversity by just listing the bear species.
Yay.
Starting with the Ursine bears in Asia. First and foremost, the Asiatic black bears are the species Ursus tibetanus. These are also called Asian black bears, moon bears, and white-chested bear.
Right.
These are found in forests across southern and eastern Asia. There are a bunch of subspecies within there that have been identified over time. Asian black bears have black fur with that white patch on their chest, which is probably either for threat displays. Bears will, stand up on their hind legs, or for attracting mates or spotting each other over a distance or whatever, some sort of display. Asian black bears are medium-sized bears. They are typically around a meter tall at the shoulder, so just a few feet tall. They range from 50 kilograms to 200 kilograms, so up to not quite half a ton. Asiatic black bears are also known from fossils all across Eurasia, which are, I've seen this noted, quite similar to modern ones.
Okay.
This species seems to be kind of the classic bear and has been the way it is for quite some time.
Cool.
Asiatic black bears I have also seen called the most bipedal of living bears.
Oh, huh.
And I assume that just means they spend more time than other bears on their hind feet.
Yeah, which is something like bears are quadrupedal most of the time, walking around on all fours, but they can stand up, and they can stand up very well. It's not like when you see like an antelope stand up just to like grab something out of the tree. Like they can actually move around on their hind feet. They can manipulate things with their front paws on their hind feet. But they can actually walk on their hind feet if they want to.
Yeah.
They're not as fast.
All terrain.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can walk around like carrying stuff.
But I'd never thought about if there was one that was better at it than the others.
Apparently this one has been suggested as the best one.
Cool.
Closely related to Asian black bears, maybe, are sun bears, which are either Hilarctos malayanus or Ursus malayanus, depending on how you're... Because in a lot of phylogeny, they are grouped with the other species in the genus Ursus, but they're still often called Hilarctos, even though that doesn't make any sense if they are nested within Ursus. But as far as I can tell, the general consensus about this problem is whatever. There's only 8 of them, so don't worry about it.
Yes, yeah.
Sun bears are found in tropical forests in Southeast Asia and onto the Indonesian islands. They're on Malaysia and I think Borneo. They are, very much like the Asian black bears, black-furred with a light chest patch, which can be white but also like yellowish.
Yeah, that's what I always picture, is that kind of almost cream-colored.
Yeah. Sun bears also have particularly short and fine fur compared to the other ones, which they are tropical, so that does make some sense. Sun bears are also the smallest of our living bear species. They are usually just over half a meter tall at the shoulder, standing on all fours, and they tend to be 25 to 65 kilograms. So, which for a bear is quite small.
Yes.
That means, so the biggest sun bears are not as heavy as you or I.
Yeah.
They are quite small bears. They are also considered the most arboreal of modern bears. They spend a ton of time in the trees.
Which also makes sense with being the smallest bear.
Yes.
That is something we see a lot of time with the most tree-dwelling members in groups is, well, now you're fighting gravity.
Yes.
So being small is going to make you better at that.
It also means you're more likely to bounce
Yes,
if you fall
exactly.
rather than leave a bear-shaped hole in the ground.
You will do better going up and better coming down.
Yes.
Regardless of how you come down.
Sun bears are also notable for eating a lot of insects.
Yes.
They have a long tongue for grabbing bugs, and I don't know if they have bigger claws than the average bear, but big claws, and they'll use their claws and teeth to dig into tree bark to get to the bugs inside.
So it's like an anteater bear.
Well, hold on.
Yep.
Because the next bear species are sloth bears.
Yep.
Sloth bears are Molursus ursinus or Ursus ursinus. They are mostly found in India. There are some in neighboring parts of Asia, but for the most part, this is an Indian species. Sloth bears have black fur, the light chest patch. Opposite to the sun bears, sloth bear fur tends to be very long and shaggy. They've got like a mane around the neck.
It's this it looks almost like they're wearing a shawl.
Yeah. Sloth bear, I've seen sloth bears once or twice at zoos, and they're every time I see a sloth bear or a picture of a sloth bear, I immediately am worried that the bear is sick. And then I look, it's like when you see a dog sometimes and they've just got like long messy fur and you're like, "Oh, are you a stray? Are you like out in the..." No, that's just how your fur is.
You're just like that.
Yeah, you're just like that. Sloth bears are like that. They are also small to medium sized. They're not quite as big as Asian black bears typically. They eat tons of bugs.
Yeah.
They are expert bug eaters, especially they go after ants and termites and bees. Sloth bears are experts at digging into hives and mounds and getting bugs out of them. One reference that I saw noted that at some times of the year, ants and termites can make up as much as 95% of a sloth bear's diet.
Ridiculous for such a big animal.
Yeah. Again, these are often 100-kilogram or more animals. And they have a lot of convergent adaptations with anteaters.
Yeah.
And similar to the sun bears, they've got long tongues, they've got big claws. Sloth bears have reduced teeth. They don't have upper incisors. And their upper lip is famously very long and flexible for scooping up bugs. So they are anteater bears, which is very cool.
I remember the first time I saw their skull, and it looks like something is wrong with their teeth for how reduced they are.
Yes.
Like, it looks like something's gone wrong with their dentition for this individual, but it's like, no, that's...
You're just like that.
That's sloth bears.
Yep. Yeah, they're just odd.
Yeah.
Well named. Sloth bears, arguably the bear that Baloo should be.
Yes, and I think that's what he was in the
book,
the live action.
Oh, that makes sense.
Bill Murray Baloo was a sloth bear, and they had him going after the honey from beehives and stuff.
And he talks about eating ants.
Yep.
In the song.
Yep.
Those three are the Asian exclusive bears. Sun bears, sloth bears, Asiatic black bears are exclusively found in Asia today, and then Europe. There's some historic or ancient examples. The other half of this subfamily are the other ones, starting with American black bears, Ursus americanus. Previously, other studies have found American black bears and Asian black bears to be sister species.
Yeah.
The one I'm following did not find that. American black bears are extremely widespread. They are found all over North America. They go way up into Canada. They go down to northern Mexico. They are the only species of bear that lives where we live.
Yes.
Like right here where we are, there is probably a black bear within not too far from where we are sitting.
Yeah.
Black bears are often black-furred, although as you go farther west, brown fur is becomes more and more common on brown bears, or black bears.
And famously shown in the movie Lake Placid,
yes,
as we discovered when we criticized it for having the wrong bear.
Black bears are medium. I mean, they're kind of like the black, for me, and I'm biased being American, this is like the most standard bear.
Yeah.
American black bears and Asian black bears are like, this is classic bear.
This feels like this is when you start up the game and all the sliders are in the middle.
Yes,
these
absolutely.
Two bears.
Black bears, again, on all fours, often are up to about 1 meter high. They weigh anywhere between 50 kilograms to 250. They follow Bergman's rule, which means that they get bigger as they go farther north. Black bears have been traditionally split into like 16 or something different subspecies, wow. Although that goes back and forth as to whether those are valid. And, like most bears, they have a very generalized diet, which varies quite a bit over their range.
Makes sense.
Yeah, black bears here versus black bears in Maine versus black bears in Alberta are eating very different things. Closely related to black bears and overlapping with their range are brown bears.
Yeah.
Maybe the best bears.
This is my favorite of the bears.
These might be my favorite too. Brown bears are Ursus arctos. They are the most widespread species of bear. Brown bears are found in western North America, most of Europe, and across northern Asia.
Yep.
They are almost all around the northern part of the northern hemisphere.
I remember when I found out that all those bears were the same species of bear. And, like, because you get, like, the different names of, like, grizzly, Kodiak, and stuff like that. So, like, I thought that they were closely related, but I thought that they were distinct bears. And it's like, no. The ones running around Russia are the same kind of bear running around California.
Yes.
What?
And they are sometimes split into subspecies or subpopulations. But, yeah, that's all the same bear. As you mentioned, those subgroups often have specific names. Grizzly bear is, depending on who you ask, either a subspecies of bear or just what we call bears in North America.
Yep.
Brown bears are typically brown. They have thick fur. They're very furry. They also often have a mane of fur around the head. They are large.
So big.
Brown bears can be between 1 to 1.5 meters tall at the shoulder. So, almost my shoulder height.
Yep.
On all fours. They are often anywhere from 200 kilograms, which is already the max size of most of the other bears we talked about, to over half a ton. The largest brown bears live along the coast of North America, including island populations. There are island giant brown bears. Famously, in the Kodiak Archipelago, which is south of Alaska, there are wild brown bears that have been recorded at over 700 kilograms. I think like 750 is around the record for wild brown bears.
Wow.
That's almost 1,500 pounds. That's a lot of bear.
That's getting closer to being a ton than over half a ton.
Yes, absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
Like black bears, brown bear diet varies quite a bit. Particularly, they're noted, and we've talked about this, for being more carnivorous in areas with more prey.
Yeah.
So in, like, Alaska and Canada, in places where there are salmon runs, or like caribou and other large ungulates, brown bears will be more carnivorous because there's more meat to feed upon. Here in North America, because brown bears and black bears overlap a bunch, there's a lot of discussion about, how to tell the difference between one and the other, especially because you can get darker furred brown bears and lighter furred black bears.
Yes.
I found a quote that I wanted to read here. This is from a 1972 book about American bears. A young national park naturalist, fresh from training, was lecturing to a crowd of tourists, discussing the differences between black bears and grizzly bears. I don't think this is a true story. I think this is just like a story you tell people.
Yeah.
The naturalist said that a good way to tell the species of a given bear was to sneak up on the bear in question and kick it in the rump, then to immediately run and climb a tree. If the bear climbs up the tree after you, it is a black bear.
Yes.
An old-timer in the audience thought this test was too elaborate. He said all you have to do to discover the species is sneak up on the bear, kick it in the rump, wait a split second, and then if you are still alive, it was a black bear. Which, that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, this makes me think of a joke my dad told me about bear safety when I was in Scouts, which is some of the important things to have with bear to think of when you're in bear country is wear bells, because sneaking up on bears and surprising them is often a way that triggers bear attacks. So wear something that makes noise. Carry bear mace with you so that if you do have an encounter, you can fend them off. and know how to identify bear scat, which is that it will smell like bear mace and have bells in it.
Yeah. Now, having said those things, we should clarify, bear attacks are not particularly common.
No.
Even in the beariest parts of North America, though they do happen.
Oh, yeah, like, they are absolutely dangerous wildlife, and they are big predators and unpredictable wild animals, as all wild animals are.
Yes.
But there's never really been a documentation I've ever heard of them, like, targeting humans.
No, usually what happens is either someone surprised them or they got too close to people while going after food.
Yeah.
Or like they smelled food inside a tent and they started investigating in the tent.
Or they got into someone's garage to look
Yes.
around and the person opened the door and now is in an enclosed space with a bear.
Yes, a cornered bear.
Mm-hmm.
Very closely related to brown bears. In fact, the sister species to brown bears, Ursus maritimus, polar bears.
Maritimus.
Ursus maritimus.
So good.
They're oceany bears. Polar bears, as the name suggests, are found in the Arctic. Not the Antarctic, only the northern part. They are found in Canada, Alaska, Greenland, northern parts of Europe and Russia. They are also found on and in the Arctic Ocean.
Yep.
The ice that covers the Arctic Ocean is home for polar bears. Polar bears, basically, if you are above a certain latitude, you're in polar bear habitat. Like I said, very closely related to brown bears. They're known to hybridize in the wild and produce either growler bears or pizzly bears, which I think are just the same thing.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if it's one of those where it depends on which was the male and the female.
Yeah, like a liger and
a Tygon.
Tygon.
Yeah. But I like both names, even though, like, Growler's the cooler name, but Pizzly's adorable.
Yeah. Polar bear fur is white or yellowish, covering black skin and a thick layer of fat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Polar bears are specialized Arctic animals. Their proportions are slenderer. They've got sort of slenderer legs, a longer neck. Polar bears are also huge.
So big.
Polar bears easily range the full spectrum of brown bear sizes, and there are reports of record polar bears in the wild of up to 1,000 kilograms. A full ton of bear. There are brown bears that size recorded from captivity, I believe.
That makes sense.
But at least one wild polar bear has been reported at a full ton in weight. They are the largest living bears and indeed the largest living land predators.
Yeah.
Although, to what extent polar bears are land predators is a little bit iffy because polar bears are extremely good swimmers.
Yes.
And they are the only bears that are known to regularly swim in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Other bears can.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping them. They're a bear. But polar bears actually do traverse ocean waters. They're commonly classified as marine mammals.
Yes.
Because they spend so much time on top of the ocean or within it. They are also the most carnivorous of modern bears. Part of this is what they're specialized for, right? They're long distance. They're traversing long distances looking for prey. They have that longer neck for, grabbing at stuff. But also part of that is that they live in the Arctic.
Yep.
There's just not a lot of plants to eat up there.
You kind of run out of options to be an herbivore.
Yes. Polar bear diets are primarily based on seals. That is their number one prey. They'll also go after walruses. They'll go after whales.
Yeah, beluga whales.
Beluga whales. Because that's how polar bears are.
Well, it's one of those where if you watch a documentary that shows beluga whales, a lot of times you'll see them with claw scars because some bear made a go for them.
Yes. Polar bears are truly impressive. They are one end of the spectrum of how bears can be.
Yeah. And everything about them is extreme. Where they live is extreme. How they hunt is a very specialized way. And they are what I often see as the go-to example of hypercarnivore.
Yes. They are hypercarnivorous. They almost don't eat any plants.
Yeah.
They're also huge.
Yep. Yep.
They get in. The smallest adult polar bear outweighs both of us by at least double.
Yep.
They're big.
And it also means that it's one of
Not
those...
both of us together, but each of us.
Yes. It's one of those where, like, we're talking about bear encounters. If I encounter a black bear, I have the feeling like, all right, but you might have just been looking for berries.
Yes.
You know, like, this is this very likely is a chance encounter. We are both in the woods for different reasons, but you were probably looking for something. You weren't looking for me. If I encounter a polar bear and it's hungry, the only thing it's looking for is meat.
Yes.
And I'm made out of, in decent proportion, meat.
Yes. You know, I said not both of us together, but I'm doing the math, and the smaller range of adult polar bear size is more than twice both of us together. So those 6 are in the subfamily Ursinae. Outside of Ursinae, the first cousins of all the rest of the bears, is a subfamily called Tremarctinae. The Tremarctine bears, there is one species of Tremarctine bears today. They are the spectacled bears, which are also called Andean bears. Tremarctos ornatus, which lives within the Andes mountain range in western South America. They are the only living bears native to South America. They have black fur. The face and chest have these distinctive markings on them, kind of like a raccoon.
Yeah.
Or like a red panda, like the way that they have that sort of mask of patterns on the face.
I think they're the prettiest bear, in my opinion.
Spectacled bears are really nice.
They're very cool
aesthetic.
Looking.
They are small to medium sized, similar to black bear sized at best. Spectacled bears are also mostly herbivorous. They eat very little meat. Between 90 to 95% of their diet is plants. And they are a bit specialized for this. They have extra strong jaws. Their teeth are a little bit more specialized for grinding up plants. And spectacled bears have a false thumb.
Oh, right. I always forget that.
Spectacled bears. So they have 5 fingers, and then one of their so there are bones called sesamoids, which are like little bone crumbs that exist around our joints. You've got them, I've got them, we all have sesamoids. A radial sesamoid, so a sesamoid associated with the arm bones, has developed into this long pseudo-digit that these bears use to hold on to plants and stuff. They are not the only ones. One step further outside, the second cousins of all the rest of the bears, the outliers of all living bears, are the Ailuropodines, giant pandas.
Yep.
Ailuropoda melanoluca is the modern species of giant panda. There has been confusion in the past, but they are in fact bears.
Can we confirm it
here? We are sure. We are 100% sure giant pandas are bears. Not to be confused with red pandas, which are a different thing that live in the exact same place and eat the exact same food.
Yep.
But are in their own family, Ailuridae, over by raccoons and skunks and stuff. Giant pandas live in bamboo forests in the mountains of China. Historically, they were more widespread across Southeast Asia, but giant pandas have been on it's been a hard like 10,000 years or so for giant pandas, because as we warmed out of the Pleistocene, bamboo forests shrunk, and then human agriculture has shrunk bamboo forests yet more. So pandas are having a hard time.
Yeah.
Giant pandas are also white, with patches of black around the eyes, the ears, the legs, and the shoulders. Giant pandas are pretty small.
Yeah.
They're only around 100 kilograms, which is smaller than I have pandas in my head.
Yep. Well, because they also, when you see a picture, they're very round.
Yeah.
And
they're rotund.
They're rotund. So I think it makes it look like they're going to be like Snorlax.
Yes.
And just this big sitting there on its belly.
Yeah, they weigh not much more than me.
Yeah.
No.
Yep. The giant from their name comes from that. The red panda was named first.
Yes.
And they both eat bamboo, and so it got named after the red panda, effectively.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
And the red panda is sometimes called the lesser panda.
Yes.
Which makes panda researchers very upset. Giant pandas. So if polar bears are one end of the bear spectrum, pandas are the opposite end of the spectrum.
On a different spectrum
yes.
that crosses over the normal bear spectrum, as anyone who's read a bear taxonomy paper can attest.
Pandas are almost completely herbivorous. Something like 99% of their diet, not just plants, bamboo specifically.
Yep.
They are highly specialized bamboo eaters, which is an extremely bad choice.
Yep.
Bamboo is hard to chew, it's hard to digest, and it's not nutritious.
Yep.
Even if you can digest it, it's not very nutritious. So giant pandas have to eat several kilograms of bamboo a day just to... This explains why they're only 100 kilograms.
Yes. Which at this point puts them as having more in common with koala bears than the other bears.
Pandas are extremely specialized as bears go. Their jaw muscles are very expanded. Their molars are very distinctive. They have very complex surfaces to their molars. And they also have the thumb.
Yeah.
That is called the panda's thumb. It is that extra pseudo-digit that is not made of finger bones, which, incidentally, not only do spectacled bears also have that, so do red pandas.
Yep.
That is a thing that they've evolved convergently. So, in addition to those physical adaptations, giant pandas are also behaviorally adapted to their lifestyle. You compared them to Snorlax before, and yeah, giant pandas live a lot like sloths.
Yeah.
They're very low energy. Their metabolism tends to be pretty low. They don't move around very much, which helps them to make the most of their extremely nutrition-poor food.
Well, yeah, and you can't be a high-energy animal if you're eating sticks.
Yes.
For your main diet. You can't run around.
So this is why Kung Fu Panda has to supplement his diet with cookies and noodles and stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, because otherwise he doesn't have the energy to do Kung Fu. Giant pandas very famously do not have a digestive system for plants.
Mm-hmm.
There don't seem to be much in the way of adaptations to the digestive system. They're using a carnivorous digestive system, so it is thought that they are probably very heavily dependent on gut microbes that help them to break down their food. So polar bears and giant pandas are both in this sort of category of doing a thing it feels like bears shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
You've gone so far outside of the norm that it feels like that shouldn't work. Like, you shouldn't be able to walk around on ice and hunt seals and make a living that way.
Yep.
You certainly shouldn't be able to be a ton doing that. And the same thing with pandas.
Yep.
You should not be able to eke a living out of eating 99% of one of the worst plants to eat in the world.
And it makes sense that those are the two that are having some of the most trouble of our bears today. That lifestyles that work when things are working.
Yes, they're highly specialized.
Mm-hmm.
And in our modern world, bamboo forests are shrinking and the Arctic is shrinking.
Yeah.
So, yes, absolutely.
The other thing that always comes to mind on pandas that I have to mention is their skull is so weird looking.
It's like a bear trying to be a gorilla.
Yes.
It's very gorilla-like.
It's almost round. It's so domed on top, and the jaw is so deep.
Yes,
and
to support that musculature.
Yeah, it's very if you could hide it among a bunch of bear skulls and people would be like, what's that random skull doing?
Yeah, that one doesn't belong
Why
here.
is it here?
Why is there a gorilla skull among these bears? Nope.
They're so weird.
That's one of them. And yet, still very bear-like.
Yeah.
Even the most specialized bears are still identifiably a bear.
Yes.
There's no bear that you look at and go, is that some weird... No, that's a bear. Yeah. They are you mistake other things for bears, but bears are hard to mistake for other things.
Yeah, it's a cool group.
It's so cool. And another really fun thing about bears is the fossil record of bears is excellent.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a little break, and then when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about fossil bears, and there's just so much fun stuff to get into. Going back into the fossil record, carnivora, the carnivorous mammals, originate around 50 million years ago or so during the Eocene, which is around the same time that we see early primates and ungulates and whales and stuff like that. The earliest carnivorous species were small and sort of weasel-like. I've often seen them compared to genets.
Okay.
which are kind of weasel cat-like little animals. There are a handful of early carnivoran groups that are thought to be closely related to bears. One such group are the amphicynodontids, which are small and, again, kind of weasel-like animals. Some of them were arboreal. These are known from the Eocene to the Oligocene, so 50 to 40, 30 million years ago, in northern continents. Sometimes these have been considered an early branch of bears within the ursid family. At the very least, they're close to bears. These sort of somewhat tree-dwelling, weasel-like animals are probably how bears got their start. Amphicynodontids should not be confused with amphicyonids, which are the bear dogs. Probably we talked about amphicyonids in episode 94, about dogs. This was a very large group of carnivores, again, starting in the Eocene. These got bear-sized. These were some of the earliest large carnivorans. In the past, amphicyonids have been identified as both canids, so true dogs, and ursids, so true bears. These days, they are thought to be their own lineage. So they're probably somewhere close to bears, but they're not actual bears themselves. The family Ursidae, for sure we agree this is an ursid, a bear, come from the Oligocene epoch, so not long after the Eocene. In total, there are around 100 named extinct bear species.
Nice.
The earliest major subfamily of bears are the hemicyonines, sometimes hemicyonids if you consider them a different family. Now, the amphicyonids, which are not bears and are their own thing, are bear dogs. The hemicyonines, which are bears, are called dog bears.
I forgot about that.
They are, these are the dog bears. There are also the bear dogs. Bear dogs are kind of dogs that look like bears, and the dog bears are bears that look like dogs. I'm so sorry, everybody out there.
I want to make a Warhammer reference that would take too long to explain, but for those of you who know Gork and Mork, that's what I'm thinking of.
Hemicyonines are an early group of bears. They originated around 35 million years ago. They are known as dog bears because they have a lot of dog-like traits. They are named for a genus called Hemicyon, which is from North America and Eurasia in the Miocene. Hemicyon was about the size of a black bear, so standard modern bear size, but they have long limbs. The legs and the feet are longer. They are digitigrade.
Oh, yeah.
They're not walking on their heels. They're walking up on their toes, like dogs and cats today. These are adaptations for running, for moving across open habitats. Dogs today are really good at that. Wolves, jackals, coyotes, these are long-distance animals. And in addition to being more running or at least long-distance adapted, Hemicyon's teeth and jaws suggest that it was more carnivorous. Probably a hypercarnivore, like wolves and such today. Overall, the whole group, Hemicyonines, were generally fox or jackal or coyote-like. They ranged from 35 million years ago all the way to about 10 million years ago. In Eurasia and North America and Africa, they did get into Africa.
Cool.
And there are about 10 genera known in total. So this was a pretty diverse early to middle Cenozoic group of bears that didn't look a lot like modern bears. This includes examples like Cephalogale, which is a very old one that is sometimes called the earliest bear. Phoberocyon, which could get to modern bear sizes.
Cool.
Like these could get up to like brown bear sized. And Plithocyon, which was more herbivorous adapted. So they were diverse in size and range and also in diet, like modern bears, but more wolf-shaped.
Yeah. Which also, that shape but grizzly sized.
No, absolutely not.
No, thank you.
Please don't. There are also other sort of, sometimes you'll see the subfamily Ursavinae, which collects a handful of these other bears that are somewhere in the bear lineage, but not always exactly understood where they are. This includes a handful of species that are cat to wolf-sized bear-like animals. So there was this sort of smattering of bears and bear cousins and bear-like creatures prior to 10, 15 million years ago. After that, in sort of the latter half of the Miocene epoch and onwards, we start to get fossils of our familiar modern subfamilies.
Yeah.
So let's go through them. Let's start with pandas. We're going to work our way back in to the center of bears. The subfamily Ailuropodinae is thought to have split from other ursids around the start of the Miocene, around 20 million years ago. The oldest known genera, there are a couple from the mid-Miocene, around 10 to 12 million years ago. One is Cretzoiarctos in Iberia, and the other one is Huracan, which was named, I think, just a couple years ago, which is be found in both North America and Eastern Asia. So we see early members of the panda lineage as far back as the mid-Miocene, and then in the late Miocene, they become more widespread. The panda subfamily was once found across North America, Europe, Asia, and into Africa.
Huh.
And they came in a variety of lifestyles. Most of them were omnivorous or carnivorous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Some of them might have been more adapted for more long-distance travel, kind of like the dog bears. Some of them, like Indarctos and Agriotherium, which has sometimes been considered a hemicyanine, but I've seen it put in the pandas, so I'm putting it there here. Indarctos and Agriotherium got brown bear-sized. Wow. So this was, during the late Miocene, the panda subfamily was as widespread and diverse as modern bears. They were all over the northern hemisphere. They ate all sorts of different things. They came in all sorts of different sizes. As time went on, we start to see a shift towards more herbivorous diets in this subfamily. Ailuroarctos, toward the end of the Miocene in China, which is about 7 million years ago, is a fossil species where we see evidence in the jaw of some of the beginnings of those specializations that we see in modern pandas. And Ailuroarctos also has evidence of the beginnings of the thumb.
Neat.
About 7 million years ago, so that thumb showed up pretty early. Then the modern genus, Ailuropoda. Our earliest known fossil species is Ailuropoda microta from the late Pliocene of China. As the name suggests, it was small, smaller than modern pandas, but complex teeth, larger jaw muscles, a true panda like we think of them today, adapted for eating more plants. And then from there till the modern, there is just this sequence of panda species that become increasingly herbivorous.
Huh.
Since the Pliocene, since 3 or 4 million years ago, this genus has just been working its way towards the highly specialized herbivory that we see in modern pandas.
Makes me wonder if there's any sort of dynamic like what we've seen discussed with aquatic adapted animals. Like, I know this came up in the news with the birds, and I feel like this came up with something else in a similar aquatic situation of, in certain groups, there seems to be a trend that when you adapt to become aquatic, you kind of get, they called it an evolutionary ratchet. You get stuck evolving that way. You can't reverse going to become less aquatic. The adaptations you've taken on have locked you in. I wonder if something like that could have happened with pandas.
Yeah, either that, or I would wonder if there was competition that they were I'll talk about, we'll see this sometimes in bears, will lean towards more of one lifestyle, one diet, to avoid competition with other species.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know. I didn't come across much discussion about why they went down this herbivorous pathway. One assumes that it was just a more sustainable lifestyle at one point.
Yeah.
One of the species, Ailuropoda baconi, which is Pleistocene, I think like mid-Pleistocene or so, was bigger than modern pandas.
Wow.
So I don't know that it was huge, but bigger than the modern species. So this clearly is a winning strategy. Man, until now.
We could have had bear cows if they had just gotten the chance to spread out and diversify.
Yeah, it's really hard not to think that this incredible lineage is pretty much over.
Yeah.
Pandas are in a tough place.
Yep.
And not just because of us. They were in a tough place when we got there.
We exacerbated what was already a bad situation.
Yes. Meanwhile, as the Ailuropodines are evolving, mostly over in Europe and Asia, and particularly pandas as we know them in Asia. Over in the Americas, we have fossils of the subfamily Tremarctinae. Tremarctine, even in the fossil record, Tremarctine bears are exclusively found in the Americas. Sometimes they're just called the spectacled bears,
Yes.
like the one that we have today. They are also often called short-faced bears.
Yeah.
Yes, the ones you've been waiting for.
Yes.
Tremarctine bears tend to have a relatively broad and short muzzle, although I've seen some debate in the literature about how short it actually is. Mm-hmm. Not like, because sometimes they're compared to cats
Yeah.
with like a shorter face, but they're not quite that short.
Yeah. Well, and I know that like the end of bear snouts is pretty fleshy, like the nose and the lip. So like it probably extended a surprising amount past the bone.
Tremarctine bears diverge around the late Miocene, so a bit later than we see those earliest pandas. The oldest member of the short-faced bear lineage is a genus called Plionarctos, which is found in various sites across North America. Plionarctos is the bear that has been identified at the Gray Fossil Site.
Yep.
Although I have heard some discussion about whether or not it is truly Plionarctos.
What?
So we'll see. Plionarctos is found from the late Miocene into the Pliocene, so it ranges between 10 million and about 3 million years ago. Plionarctos is black bear sized, maybe a little smaller, likely largely herbivorous, sort of omnivore but leaning more towards plants, like modern Tremarctine bears, like modern spectacled bears. As we move from the late Pliocene into the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, around 2.5 million years ago, two things happen of importance. 3 more genera show up. Tremarctos, which is the genus that includes the modern species, and Arctodus and Arctotherium. The other thing that happens is the Great American Biotic Interchange, episode 43, when North and South America become connected for the first time since the Cretaceous, and bears move into South America.
Yes.
Along with tons of other stuff. The modern species of spectacled bear is Tremarctos ornatus. There is a fossil spectacled bear, Tremarctos floridanus, which is known throughout the Pleistocene, similar in size and habits to the modern species, found early on in North America and then later in South America as it spread on down. Tremarctos ornatus, the modern species, is apparently not known from fossils.
Oh.
So we don't know for sure when our modern spectacled bear showed up. It might be that it is a fairly recent split or development from the ancient Tremarctos.
Huh.
The other two genera, Arctodus, which lived in North America, and Arctotherium in South America. Between the two of them, there are, I believe, 7 species named. Most of them are small to medium-sized, pretty standard what we expect from bears, with 2 extremely notable exceptions. In the north, we've got Arctodus simus, and in the south, we've got Arctotherium angustidens, the giant short-faced bears.
Emphasis on the giant.
Emphasis on the giant. We'll get there. Now, Arctodus, there are 2 species known of Arctodus. The earlier one is Arctodus pristinus, which was a small to medium-sized omnivore throughout the early Pleistocene, so, 1 to 2 million years ago. Pretty standard. Around the middle of the Pleistocene, it gives rise to Arctodus simus. Arctotherium is 5 species from South America. The giant one, angustidens, is actually the earliest one.
Oh, weird.
And then after that, it is followed by 4 smaller species over time.
Huh.
So the giant short-faced bears in North America were late Pleistocene, and the ones in South America were early Pleistocene.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
They've got 2 different dynamics going. The North America is more like Super Saiyans, where they're getting bigger and stronger over time, while the other one's like Greek mythology, where you started with the Titans, and then you had the Titans' kids.
Yeah.
Weird.
You're a nerd.
This is how my brain makes sense of the world.
I referenced Saiyans on a recording for Leave It to Us very recently. So let's zoom in on giant short-faced bears, starting with how giant were they? Arctodus simus, the North American species of giant short-faced bear, has been estimated to have an average mass between 700 and 800 kilograms. On average, it was in the upper range of brown and polar bears today. And I've seen it noted that 1,000 kilograms was not uncommon.
Yeah.
These bears were commonly reaching the absolute maximum sizes that we see in bears today, and probably exceeding them from time to time. Arctodus simus has been reconstructed to have, on all fours, to have a shoulder height as high as 5.5 feet. Not quite 2 meters. This is a bear that on all fours could look you in the eye.
Yep.
And if it stood up on its hind legs, you'll see these skeletons in museums. We have one at the Gray Fossil Site. They are a good 10, 11 feet tall, standing on the hind legs.
Yep.
Like a 3 meter, they're huge.
It is so intimidating.
They're so big. Arctotherium angustidens in South America was bigger.
Yeah.
It is the bigger of the two. Its mass has been estimated to get up to and potentially exceeding 1,500 kilograms. That is 1.5 tons. That is a bear that weighs as much as my car
God.
and is made of significantly less metal.
Oh, that's so big.
That's a bison.
Yep.
But that's a bear the size of a bison. They're so big.
I remember when they found a specimen, and I distinctly remember a picture of its, I think it was its arm bone.
Yeah, I think it's the humerus.
Yep, next to a mammoth bone of the same, and it is not as much smaller as you want it to be.
Yeah, these bears were huge. These are the largest bears of all time. This is sort of like when we talk about sauropod dinosaurs.
Yep.
How small sauropod dinosaurs are on par with the largest other land herbivores. The small giant short-faced bears are roughly the size of the largest living bears.
And it's just, that's so much bear.
And unlike our modern bears, where the giants are limited to like the Arctic and islands off of Alaska, these were all over North and South America. These were very widespread. What exactly they were doing at 1.5 tons of bear has been much debated.
Yes.
They are large-bodied. They also have proportionately large molars and long legs.
Mm-hmm.
Not, wolf long. They're not quite like the hemicyaneans, but proportionally their legs do seem to be a bit longer than typical for bears. In the past, they have been hypothesized as more active hunters. So more cursorial, right? Better for pursuing things, maybe more cat-like. On the other hand, they have also been interpreted as hyper scavengers.
Yeah.
That they might have been bone crushing like hyenas, and that instead of chasing things down, those longer limbs might have just been for covering more area. Wandering from place to place to find carrion or whatnot. However, recent research seems to be circling around the conclusion that giant short-faced bears were a lot more like modern bears than they've typically been interpreted as. That in terms of their anatomy, they are largely similar to brown bears and other bears that we have today. More research, including isotope studies of the teeth, suggests that they were probably omnivorous. They don't seem to have been exclusive carnivores, although they do seem to have been more carnivorous than modern spectacled bears, which are mostly plant eaters.
Yes.
So these probably had a diet more like brown bears, sort of in between and fluctuating as needed. The large body size, instead of being, for chasing things across the plains like a T-Rex, might have been to help them take down larger prey, right? Modern brown bears will take down caribou and moose, and being big helps them do that, even if that's not where they're getting all or most of their food. Being a giant short-faced bear might have been good for occasionally taking down a bison or something.
Yes.
Also, I have seen it pointed out in numerous studies that being large might have made them really good at stealing carcasses.
Yeah. Yep.
this is something that this is why lions are able to steal carcasses from hyenas.
Yes.
Because a lion's just bigger.
Yeah, when a pride of lions shows up, they weigh as much as your 20 hyenas.
Right. So you just leave. And in a world full of saber-toothed cats and dire wolves, I love to imagine the image. It's like what I always describe in like the Nile. Like, no one messes with crocodiles until a hippo comes along.
Yes.
And a hippo comes along and everyone moves out of the way.
Yes.
That's kind of what I'm picturing, is that you're an American lion, you're enormous, nothing on the continent wants to mess with you. You just took down a horse and you're just getting ready to eat it. And then Arctodus shows up, so you leave.
Yeah, just strolling through the grassland.
Just taking a stroll, coming on over. I smelled your dead horse from 3 miles away. You're on the clock.
Yep.
That's how long you've got.
You got till I get there. Finish up, wrap it up.
So that might have been it. It might have just been that they were huge because they could be huge in a world with more large prey, and that being big allowed them to do what bears do.
Yes.
Which is to eat anything you want.
And it's always an interesting question when we get giant members of a group, because both potential options of, were you just a big version but doing basically the same thing, or were you doing something fundamentally different because of how big you were, are both options and both easy to jump to.
Absolutely.
Like, it's like when giant crocodiles get talked about, it's often portrayed as, and then they were ambushing hadrosaurs. And some we know that was the case, but others, yeah, but maybe they weren't. At that size, you might be able to fundamentally hunt differently. And so it's often very easy to fall onto one without considering the other. And this one, it feels like, well, but that's such a big bear. Surely it's doing something weird. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe you just could be that big back then. And being a bear, still being a bear, you can just be a bear 2 levels up than you can be today.
It's also very likely that they were hibernators. Arctodus, I think that example I gave before of like a female and some juveniles in a cave together might have been an Arctodus example.
Neat.
And boy, the idea of stumbling into the cave where Arctodus is hibernating.
Yep.
Bad idea.
Yep. You are a bear cub now.
Yes. You better hope. You sneak up on it, you kick it in the rump. You sneak up on it, you kick it in the rump, and then you run into a pride of saber-toothed cats, and if they leave you alone, it was a giant short-faced bear.
Yes.
Now, the South American giant short-faced bear, Arctotherium angustidens, is early Pleistocene. It does not have small ancestors down there, which suggests that either they evolved large very quickly, or we're just missing the earlier Arctotherium fossils. It's likely that they expanded in their size and range as they moved into South America because there wasn't a lot of competition down there. Arctotherium angustidens goes extinct around the mid-Pleistocene, possibly because other carnivores were moving down into South America and crowding out that competition.
Yeah.
Later species of Arctotherium are not only smaller, but more herbivorous.
Yeah.
The latest Arctotherium species are a lot like spectacled bears today, eating mostly plants. Up in the north, Arctodus simus is late Pleistocene. It shows up around the time Arctotherium angustidens is going extinct. Arctodus simus is showing up, which is roughly around the time where certain other carnivores are disappearing from North America, including Agriotherium, which was one of those panda lineage bears, and bone-crushing dogs, Borophagus. It is also around the time that bison first make it into North America.
Oh.
So this is a time... Yeah, bison are pretty new. Bison are fairly new to North America. This is a time period where some carnivores were moving out of the way and new herbivores were moving in, and that might have set the stage for Arctodus pristinus to give rise to this monstrous-sized descendant.
That's pretty cool.
What's really interesting is Arctodus and Arctotherium used to be thought to be sister to each other. But more there's DNA study, because these are recent enough, suggests that Arctotherium is actually closer to modern spectacled bears, which means that the giant short-faced bears are convergent.
Yeah.
This evolved twice in 2 different lineages, which is very cool.
Which makes you wonder, like, if, we fast forwarded 5 million years or however long into our future, if a giant grizzly evolved, or a giant surviving member of the polar bear or whatever, would it end up taking on a similar shape?
Yeah. Is that the shape you have to be a bear that size?
Is that what giant bears look like? Is this slightly longer limbed and maybe even shorter faced, or is that just from your lineage? That would be very interesting.
Yeah. There's also been the suggestion of sexual dimorphism observed in giant short-faced bears. This is very common in modern bear species. Males are almost always significantly larger than females. Giant short-faced bears also seem to fall into 2 different size categories. One paper described it as giant short-faced bears come in 2 sizes, large and extremely large.
Large and yikes.
Yes, exactly. Which might just be different subspecies, but it has also been suggested to potentially be males and females.
Well, and it also brings up the question that we talked about this with the modern ones, that Tennessean black bears compared to Canadian black bears, and Californian grizzly bears compared to Kodiak or other brown bears. Could this also be a habitat thing?
Yeah. I don't know offhand if Bergman's rule has been observed for giant short-faced bears. If because they're known from Florida and the Carolinas and California. They were all over North America. I don't know what does the northern subpopulation of Arctodus look like?
Well, and are the bigger members, even if it's not just a range thing, were you hunting something like the salmon-eating Kodiak bears, where you have a super protein-fueled diet because you are the ones that take down the bison migration or the whatever it is.
Yes.
That's why our biggest members are so big, is because, like modern bears, you are actually quite diverse for being one species.
And they almost certainly were.
Yeah.
And it does make, because polar bears today are typically in the range of, 500 to 800 kilograms, but have gotten up to a ton. It really makes you wonder, there must have been every now and then a 2-ton Arctotherium just living his best life.
Yep. Well,
down in South America.
It's that paper we talked in the news one time of, we are typically and almost surely missing the top 1% or whatever it was of basically any fossil group. So
yeah,
the upper size categories of these bears is probably something ridiculous.
Arctodus and Arctotherium, both genera, are present all across the Ice Age, the Pleistocene. Arctodus simus, the giant northern short-faced bear, and the later smaller species of Arctotherium both go extinct at the end of the Pleistocene during the end Pleistocene megafaunal extinction, episode 25. They are survived by spectacled bears down in South America, which is the only living member of this subfamily.
Which is such a cuddly modern representative.
Yeah, it's got the sloth, again, it's got that sort of sloth feeling.
Yeah. To be glad I'm the one you have to deal with.
So help me, I'll turn this geologic timescale around.
If my grandpa were here, boy, he'd show you what for.
And finally, the major subfamily of bears we have today, Ursinae, which includes all the black bears, brown bears, and others. The earliest members of this subfamily include a bear called Ororarctos. A bear called Ororarctos. Man, it's Aurora Arctos.
Yes.
Ororarctos, which is from the Middle Miocene of Nebraska about 15 million years ago. So around that same time we're seeing the earliest members of the other ones. Ororarctos is considered an early member of the ursine lineage. It is badger-sized.
Oh.
So 10 to 20 kilograms, a really small little guy. Limb anatomy suggests that it was a tree dweller, and the jaws and teeth show early hints of the adaptation of the chewing style we see in modern bears. So it seems like this would, This group might have gotten started as badger-sized animals starting to live and eat the way modern bears do.
Interesting.
Starting in the Pliocene, around 5 million years ago, ursines spread all over the place. They end up all over the northern hemisphere. This is a time period where temperatures around the world are cooling, grasslands spread, sea levels are falling, which means more land connections. Some combination of all of these things is probably what allows all these bears to spread all over the northern hemisphere. We get in Pliocene a bear called Protarctos in Eurasia and North America, black bear-like in size, early herbivorous adaptations like we see in modern black bears and other bears. Protarctos is also known from fossils in the Arctic, which suggests that it likely had adaptations for surviving up in the Arctic, either eating plants that were particularly nutritious or hibernating.
Yeah.
So we don't know how far back hibernation goes, but this is a bear at least in an environment where it would make sense to be hibernating. The oldest member of the genus Ursus, which is the genus we have today, is Ursus minimus from Europe as far back as the beginning of the Pliocene, about 5 million years ago. Ursus minimus is small, around 65 kilograms, so sun bear sized. It is typically considered the likely ancestor of all of the other Ursus species. So it gave rise to the Asian species on one side and then the American and northern species on the other. It is thought to be the direct ancestor of the Etruscan bear, Ursus etruscus, which is known from Europe and Asia and North Africa throughout the early part of the Pleistocene. This was another black bear-sized omnivore. And the Etruscan bear is thought to have given rise to 2 other species, Ursus arctos, brown bears, and Ursus spelaeus, cave bears.
Oh, right. Yes.
Ursus arctos and Ursus spelaeus both appear in the fossil record around 1 million years ago. Cave bears are some of the most famous and most studied fossil animals ever.
Yep.
Ursus spelaeus, the cave bears, show up around the middle of the Pleistocene, around 1.2 million years ago. So around the same time that Arctodus simus is getting gigantic over in North America. Cave bears spread all across Eurasia. They are extremely diverse and variable. They have been considered either one very wide-ranging and diverse species, or a complex of as many as 6 different species.
Okay.
There's a ton of different species names that are considered part of the cave bear complex. They are either the same species or something very similar. Cave bears are called cave bears because they are, as I saw one paper describe, the most abundant Pleistocene fossils found in caves of Europe.
Okay.
They have been subject to tons of research. They are considered a model organism for Pleistocene megafauna. There was one, I forget where this was, I think it might have been like the Romans or some early European civilizations, well, earlier, that would grind up cave bear bones to get phosphate. They're so common that you could mine them.
Yeah.
Cave bears are all over the place.
Cool.
In terms of their anatomy and their size, they are very similar to their sisters, brown bears. Their teeth, the wear on their teeth, and the isotopes of their teeth all indicate that cave bears were mostly herbivores. There is some variation like we see today, but they are largely a specialized herbivorous group, probably kind of like spectacled bears today, where they were mostly eating plants. I saw one paper note that cave bears were the first extinct species for which carbon and nitrogen isotopes were used to infer the diet.
Awesome.
Yeah, model organism. Very cool.
Wow.
The fact that they're really common in caves has led to, even more so than other bears, like we don't find brown bear fossils in caves quite as much, has led to the suggestion that they were likely using them for denning or for hibernating, possibly more often than other bear species. One study did a genetic study and found that specific caves are linked to certain genetic lineages of cave bears, which suggests there might have been generational use of these caves.
Yeah.
They're doing the sea turtle thing, you know, returning to the place where they were born, potentially.
That's a neat concept.
They went extinct around 25,000 years ago, again during the Pleistocene megafaunal extinction. There is some evidence in DNA for a extended decline in population. Some have suggested that their reliance on caves might have made them less flexible. They also seem to have been more specialized herbivores. So if the changing environments they couldn't keep up with, their plants were disappearing, if caves were becoming less amenable. One paper also pointed out that another species that uses caves a lot is humans.
Yeah.
So they might have had competition for, if humans weren't, you know, just outright attacking them, there might have just been competition for caves.
Oh, yeah.
With humans.
Just us chasing them out of a cave.
Exactly.
Or
taking one first and then defending
squatting in a cave that they were going to use, but we got there before hibernation season kicked in.
Yes.
And now they can't find anywhere else.
So cave bears were extremely common all across Europe and into Asia during the latter half of the Ice Age. They've been studied a ton. They were basically plant-eating, cave-dwelling brown bears.
Yeah.
Similar size, similar shape, with their own unusual habits.
So cool.
Meanwhile, their sister species, Ursus arctos, brown bears, spent the latter half of the Pleistocene also spreading all across Europe and Asia, and making it into North America, where we have them here today. During the late Pleistocene, around 100,000 years ago, they split off another species, which became polar bears. And that more or less puts us where we're at today with our distribution of bears. One thing that I think is really cool that has been done with brown bear fossils, brown bears all across their range have been studied for isotopes in their teeth to interpret their diet. And so when we talk about bear species being more or less herbivorous or carnivorous, it's not just from the shape of the teeth, but the isotopes can actually give us an idea of the proportions. What proportion of your diet was coming from meat versus from plants. Brown bears, and this goes a long way to answering the question of why are brown bears still around when the other ones aren't. Isotope studies have shown that brown bears, in regions where they overlapped with cave bears, were more carnivorous, and in regions where they overlapped with giant short-faced bears, were more herbivorous.
So cool!
And in North America, brown bear diets, based on the isotopes, shift to more carnivory after Arctodus goes extinct. And in Europe, they shift to more herbivory after cave bears go extinct.
Yeah.
And this, I think, brings us back all the way back to the beginning of what makes bears so good at doing what they do. They are extraordinarily versatile.
Yes.
We see this today, where brown and black bears overlap in North America. The black bears will be more herbivorous and the brown bears will be more carnivorous. They're able to adjust their lifestyle and habit to live alongside the other animals in that environment.
Well, being super omnivores is one of nature's oldest cheat codes. Like,
being a generalist is how you survive extinctions.
If you can eat anything, then it takes a lot more to knock the knees out from under you, because you can find some. It's why our species has done so well on the planet. Like, we're adaptive in many other ways that we can handle different weathers and different terrain. But underlying all of that is there's something everywhere that we can turn into food.
Yes.
Especially with the adaptation of fire usage and things like that. So, bears are the ultimate not piggy eater. And it really means that in not just changing ecosystems, but different scenarios, different neighbors, you can do fine.
Yeah.
And even if you're not going to do as well as you could, you might be a smaller version of yourself because you're not getting as much meat as your cousins who aren't competing with the short-faced bear. But you're still a healthy grizzly bear. You're just slightly smaller.
Yep.
So you're doing fine. And once the big short-faced bears disappear, all this meat's free to have.
And now you get to take over and you get to eat all of those bison and stuff.
So cool.
It's very interesting to go through the fossil record of bears because we talked about how, modern bears, what defines them is that they're just all over the place. They're extremely diverse in their habits and conservative in their anatomy.
Yes.
They all are shaped almost exactly the same, and then they do all this stuff. And it seems like that's kind of been what they've been doing for 10 million years. They were taking turns of which group was all over the place. But even the extremes of bears. Today we've got polar bears, we've got pandas. In the past we had giant short-faced bears. We're all still kind of sticking to the base bear game plan, which is be a bear and eat what there is to eat and hibernate if you need to.
Yep. And even with the polar bear, which is super specialized, when they are forced out of their habitat into residential areas, they make do. They rummage through trash just like your other bears would do.
Well, and they can hybridize with grizzly bears because they can exist in the habitats alongside grizzly bears.
Yep. So, they are still surprisingly flexible for such a specialized species.
And giant pandas, as specialized as they are, and they are indeed, like polar bears, in danger. And giant pandas also don't have any close relatives to hybridize themselves to safety with.
That really is they lack the support network.
Yes, they do. Giant pandas will eat meat.
Yeah.
I've heard it described that, a giant panda in a zoo is fed a strict diet of bamboo. But if a squirrel gets in there, if it can grab it, it'll grab it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this has been the winning strategy of bears. And it does make me, you were talking about that, distant future Earth. I like to imagine that in another 10 million years, when there will be weird things evolving in all sorts of contexts, there will still just be bears.
Yep.
There'll still just be brown bears.
Yep.
It's there's a bear. What does it do? The same thing bears have been doing for 20 million years.
It's they fall into one of those categories of animal where it just seems like turtle and the semi-aquatic crocs and a handful of others where it's just this shape like rodents, know.
You did it.
This shape, if rat-shaped, bear-shaped, turtle-shaped, these shapes just work.
Yep. You won evolution.
Yeah.
You did it.
You can just keep going. There really isn't any amount that Earth can change that will make this shape not functional.
Yep. You might not like it.
Yes.
This is peak mammal.
Yes. Yep.
Bear, deer, and rodent.
Yeah.
That's it. That's peak. This is peak mammal.
Which is, boy, what a cool animal to be one of those examples.
Yeah.
Bears are so fantastic.
Bears are awesome.
I love them.
Very cool stuff. Listeners, there's so much more we could have talked about with bears. There's so much to go into about bears, but this was a very fun overview. Check out the blog post. We'll have pictures. I've already put together a collage of all 8 living species of bears that we'll put in the blog post, and we'll have images. Maybe I'll get a picture of the short-faced bear from the fossil site.
Yes.
With people standing next to it.
Yes.
Before we wrap everything up, there is a last section of the episode, and that is our patron question. We actually have 2 patron questions today. One of the benefits that our patrons can get on Patreon for supporting us is the ability to submit questions for us to answer here on the podcast. What's our first one today?
Our first question is from Danielle. Is there any evidence of modern animals evolving to fill niches left open from the Pleistocene mass extinction?
I chose to answer this one here in the patron questions because we just answered it a little bit. Yeah, brown bears have not evolved a whole new lifestyle, but in different places have shifted their diet to fill in an area that wasn't available before. This has also been observed in rabbits, I think in North America, who after the end Pleistocene became more grass-eating. And jaguars have been noted to shift from, in the Pleistocene they were more generalists, have shifted to more focus on large prey, which formerly was niche occupied by saber-toothed cats and stuff. So there hasn't been necessarily, not that I know of off the top of my head, an animal that has now fully moved in and to do a thing a previous group was doing. But there have been species that have adjusted or expanded their lifestyle to take advantage of a niche that is now open.
It's also a situation where if we were able to fast forward to get a glimpse of where things are headed, I would not be surprised at all if we did see that.
Right. If your grizzly bears become giant short-faced bears, your jaguars grow out their canines.
Exactly. Like, we are still so recent after that extinction that there's not been a chance yet for anyone to truly evolve into a missing niche. Those niches are still effectively open and missing, or quote unquote missing. Sure. I wouldn't be surprised at all, though, if we fast forward and we get some cats acting like past cats and bears acting like past bears, wolves acting like some past, stuff like that, where you will see some body types return convergently as that role now gets refilled.
Yeah. I believe deer have also been observed to have gotten larger after the Pleistocene extinction.
That makes sense. Sort
of filling in those spaces in the ecosystem.
Yeah. So how long until we get terror birds again?
Hopefully soon.
Right?
Hopefully.
I've been waiting.
In my lifetime.
Hurry up, Sariamas.
Well, speaking of which, our second patron question
is from Daria. How would de-extinction affect the family trees and lineages of animals, especially if we have to mix DNA like in the case of elephants and woolly mammoths? And how would it affect future paleontologists who find these remains?
A very interesting question. This actually came up in the Discord not too long ago, where people were talking about this exact thing, because Colossal has made their announcement about their nonsense direwolves.
Yes.
And it's gotten people wondering, how do we classify an animal like this? And in the case of, the idea of editing the DNA of modern animals to function or resemble ancient species, that feels very similar to what we do with domestication.
Yes.
Where, dogs are wolves. Phylogenetically, they are a branch off of wolves. Colossal, even if Colossal had edited them to be a lot more like dire wolves, those are still gray wolves taxonomically. They've just been genetically modified rapidly. So I would be inclined that that's how we would classify something like that, is that would be like Canis lupus dirus or something. And the same thing with the elephant. That's Elephas, whatever Asian elephants are. Mammuthus or something like that. That would have to be within that family tree.
Yes. I think that's absolutely the route we would use if this becomes an issue that we really have to categorize.
Yeah.
This is a modification of or alteration of this base lineage, because in most cases it's still going to be over 90% that animal.
Right.
Like 90% of the DNA is going to be that original lineage. I don't think we are anywhere near the technological capability to be like, it's 50% these two things, at which point it would start to get weird as to say who it's more related to. In these cases, it's going to be basically that animal with some tweaks.
Yep. And in terms of, and then if you have something like thylacines, where the idea is let's bring them back, I guess it would just be thylacines again.
Yeah. Like if you're fully able to. If it was
just you cloned a thylacine, I guess so. This falls into a weird spot where there isn't a very clear answer and it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be some people who get all up about the taxonomy to try to figure it out. In terms of how future paleontologists would be affected by it, I'm inclined to say they wouldn't. Because let's say that we de-extinct thylacines, in 10 years or whatever Colossal says they want to do. That's less than 100 years after thylacines went extinct.
Yep.
So I don't think that future paleontologists would notice it.
Yep.
That's such a small gap that I don't think it would be noticeable.
Yeah, I think it would just, if they did notice the gap, they would probably make the same assumptions we would make if we saw a gap like that, which is, well, we're just missing those fossils.
Yeah, for some reason, they just didn't fossilize that millennium.
Exactly. We either haven't found the very rare fossils that exist for that time, or they just were living somewhere that didn't fossilize them, and then they showed back up. Like, we see that in fossil records all the time, where
yes,
this lineage is here, there's a 5 million year gap where we just don't have any fossils, and then, here they are again. Evidently, they were still on the planet, still living, but doing something or being somewhere that we haven't looked or wasn't fossilizing.
I also suspect that, you know, like if we did it with mammoths or something, I suspect that a future paleontologist wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an Asian elephant and a DNA-edited mammoth elephant.
Yep.
Because even if we're somehow able to edit their behavior, and even if they are somehow able to establish a wild population, I don't imagine their anatomy would be very different.
Yeah, like most of the features that get discussed are soft tissue features.
Yes.
Hair and fat layer and stuff like that. So a lot of those aren't going to show in the skeleton. The only ones that would really mess with it is if we get into like sci-fi levels of hybridization, where you're getting suddenly a lineage shows up that obviously has features of another lineage that is so drastic, at which point, if those future paleontologists have the same technology, they might come to the same conclusion.
Yeah. Although I do think that I doubt future paleontologists would be any more confused by that than they will be by dogs.
Yep, exactly.
Which have also been radically genetically altered. So, yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah.
Hopefully we never have to worry about it.
Yes. Yes. It's definitely one of those, well, it's also one of those questions of what kind of people are these future paleontologists like?
Right.
Is this one of those scenarios where our civilization extends to such a degree that then we collapse and now we're like the ancient lineages in D&D and Skyrim?
Yes.
Where
we're
they're
in
going
a post-apocalyptic world.
Or like it's the next
era, the next age of humanity.
Yes. And are they even humans that are the next paleontologists?
Right.
So
this
will
is
it be
when Charlton Heston comes back to Earth, and well, I guess Mark Wahlberg comes back to Earth, and we're all apes.
Yep. And will it be one of those situations where they can't comprehend the things we were doing because they haven't yet got to that level of technology yet?
Right.
So the things that we did to the fossil record will be just beyond their comprehension because they don't know what quantum DNA editing is.
Or it'll be just us in the future, and we'll find a bone and go, oh, hey, this is one of those weird, that weird mammoth that they made.
Yep, I remember that from the History Hollow.
Yes. Thank you, Daria and Danielle, for those questions. Thank you, everybody who supports us on Patreon. Thank you, everybody who requested this episode topic. This was a very popular request.
Yeah.
Check out the blog post on our website for more links and pictures and stuff for more information if you are so inclined. You can find links to the Patreon and the blog and other places in the episode description. Join us on Discord and on our social medias to chit-chat about stuff. Don't forget that Leave It to Us is officially out now, the first couple of episodes, so check that out wherever you find your podcast. Very exciting stuff. Also, Croc and Snake Month are coming up, so we had a whole lot of exciting things in the near future. And of course, as always, a major thanks to all of our patrons, and an extra major thanks to our top tier patrons, Jeff Ellington, Sarah May, and Danielle the Bug Lover. We release episodes every fortnight, so another episode comes out in the not too distant future, so join us then as well. Bear puns.
Bears! Thanks for bearing with us.
Mm-hmm.
You're smarter than the average listener.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, that's just another Yogi one.
Yeah. My favorite baseball player.
This podcast is the bare necessities.
Great, very good. We did it. Quota. Done. There's no rule in the rule book that says bear can't play baseball. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Common Descent podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and check our WordPress blog for pictures and links after each episode. Huge thanks to our patrons whose support helps keep this podcast running and who get access to bonus goodies on Patreon. The song you're hearing is called On the Origin of Species by Protodome, which we found at ocremix.org. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us next time.